Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Olivia Pedersen, CEO of Sustaio. Sustaio empowers people to live climate smarter by incentivizing emissions reducing behavior. Olivia, I'm so excited to chat with you as we were discussing before the show. Anyone within the climate and sustainability space is always fascinating to talk to because it's such, I think a newer, but even more and more progressively necessary space for a lot of companies and people to be invested in. And I know someone like myself who loves to make or tries to make at least climate-friendly decisions or, sustainability kind of forward decisions, always likes to know more ways that I think, I can, impact in a positive way my behaviors to the overall kind of, I guess, movement that everybody should be going into. So, but before we get into all the good stuff with Sustaio, describe the Wal-Mart effect. You mentioned this in the notes that you sent ahead of time. Describe the Wal-Mart effect and how it kind of clicked off your climate crusade.
Yeah, it was just a book. It was a book written in the 90s, I think. And then I read it in the 2000s, early 2000s. And it was just one of those books that just showed how the world was working post-industrial revolution, how interconnected everything is, and how, it really just described this butterfly effect going on that, exists even, tenfold as it did before when the book was written. And ultimately what just caught my attention about it is just that, like I just said, the interconnectivity of everything and how one action over here will play out over there. And ultimately that's how carbon works, just on a cycle within the atmosphere. And so that's really what sparked this all. And that was when I was about 18, I read that book or something like that, right after I graduated high school. And since then, like I come from art and design, and I was a designer before I was starting Sustaio. And it was really like, that was basically the seed that was planted. That was like, how do I use design as a means to be a change agent within sustainability and climate action?
Yeah. And what inspired the idea behind Sustaio to kind of focus on an incentive-based model to help people, promote people's, positive behaviors towards climate? And what are those behaviors? I think that's one thing is we all think we make climate-friendly decisions, but what decisions can we make better?
Yeah. So I, for about 10 years was in the athletic and outdoor industry, working as a designer from small to large corporations. And I really just got frustrated by the inherent impact that the outdoor and athletic industry was having on the world, ironically. So I left and went back to school to get my master's in sustainable design. And then it was through my thesis research that I really became obsessed with what's my personal footprint? How do I make sustainable choices throughout my everyday? And how does that become a subconscious decision, a subconscious choice, much like how we choose different brands and other categories of our life. Or the example I like to use the most is, how can we make people aware of their carbon actions or their climate, whether it's their carbon or their water or their pollution and waste? How do we make them able to determine what's going to be the climate smarter decision based off of the same way that we can look at a gallon of milk and know, hey, that's going to be anywhere from, $2 to $5 or $6, depending on what type of brand I buy.
Yeah. And what goes into the, consideration when thinking about companies or choosing brands that are making a positive, say, impact? Yeah, because I was talking to another founder and there was this whole, I can't remember, where you essentially buy like carbon credits from other companies that are doing more positive actions. And you can buy those credits to maybe negate some of the negative implications that your product has or service has. What goes into the consideration of choosing a brand that is climate friendly or at least working towards more friendly behaviors, for their company?
Yeah. And I think to back up first, before getting into the choice of where am I consuming, it's first the choice of like, how much am I consuming? What am I consuming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a really tough balance with living a more sustainable life, especially from the place where we're coming from, like consume more, excess, buy cheap, buy in quantity, not quality. So it's really like switching that mindset of more is less, or less is
Less is
more.
more. Yeah.
And so I'm going to say, yeah, less is more. And, like consumers have a lot of power within their demand. And so if you don't like a company and the way that they're acting, don't purchase with them. And that is the biggest control that we have as consumers. What do we spend our dollars on? And that's the most powerful statement. So, these companies, fashion is my favorite example because it's one of those where consumers get really mad about companies in fast fashion. It's like, well, stop buying clothes every month, every week. You're supporting that trend. So that's really where I wanted to start. And then, once you do, okay, am I consuming appropriately to my needs? And not sacrificing quality of life, because nobody wants to sit in a cold, dark box and drink warm beer. It's more about, how do I actually live well and also be responsible for my oceans and water that I'm consuming. So when looking at companies, an easy thing to do that's pretty low bandwidth is looking for the certifications they have. These are good signals, B Corp, other certifications that are out there. But ultimately, that's like an easy checkbox. But ultimately, a lot of new companies might not have the resources to get those things, or just might not make sense to get those things. And a really good example of this that's more evolved, USDA organic. Like a lot of small farms have the means to get that cert. Does that mean that their practices are not organic? No, but they might even be better than the USDA cert framework. But that's when you have to go a step deeper is like, okay, I don't see a cert, but that doesn't mean they're not sustainable. Like, what am I seeing on their about page? Yeah. What commitments are they making publicly? And I think that's the boldest thing companies can, because once you go public, you can't go back. You'll either have a PR nightmare on the hands or you'll just ruin your brand value. So companies that are managing their emissions, managing their water, treating their people well, treating the stakeholders beyond their employees, and really running their business with more than just a bottom line, with the triple bottom line of people, planet, profit, and beyond, and now a lot of people are talking about regeneration. So not only is my business sustainable, but it's actually capturing more carbon than it's emitting. Or, Tom's is a great example from back in the day where buy one, get one. That was a super innovative and revolutionary business model that came out. But there's just a lot of signals you can look at, and consumers are really smart today. They can see through the BS of things. So like on Instagram, you'll see ads that are like, these jeans are great. They're really sustainable and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, how are they sustainable? Just being aware of the hot words and then being like, cool, they said a hot word. How do they back up that hot word? Like, what does sustainable mean to this company? Because it's such a complex word, and there is a standard definition for it. But how does that brand internalize sustainability or regeneration and output it into the world to make their impact better?
Yeah. And as from Sustaio's, I guess, perspective, how do you kind of filter through the companies and kind of know which companies are backing up those hot words? Are they self-report? Do companies self-report the things that they're doing, say on their website or through, I don't know, some repository or database? Are they getting certified? I know you mentioned USDA organic certified, that's something that, is a standard. How are companies reporting the positive or impactful things that they're doing in terms of sustainability or climate or emissions? And how do you siphon through that information?
Yeah, so most companies are under voluntary self-reporting today, which is really that's really cool. It's not mandatory. The SEC is coming down with regulations soon, but they're not mandatory yet. So yeah, you can look at a company's website, and usually at the bottom footer or hopefully in the top footer, they have their sustainability initiatives or their ESG initiatives, their environmental social governance initiatives, or they ultimately publicly disclose their annual report that will go into what they did within their ESG framework, how much emissions they saved, et cetera. And so, that's the biggest way that we look at that, and just overall brand expression on a website, and looking at who runs the company and how they express themselves on LinkedIn and what's their values, and are their values aligned with what the brand's saying? Because if they're not, then there's obviously a miss or a disconnect going on there where they're saying one thing, but the leadership of the company doesn't actually back that up. So there's so many ways to just vet companies. It's awesome these days.
Yeah. It's just funny that you mentioned about back to the brand awareness and, consumers being not even just curious, but more aware. There's like the recent thing with Balenciaga, and people on TikTok kind of threw a flamethrower at them. But I think for me, it's exciting because knowing more about the brands I'm consuming, I feel more attached to the things I'm purchasing. And how do you kind of build in that attachment or that behavior for companies and organizations rather than for individuals? I know you target a few different kind of, what would you say, not customer profiles, but I guess archetypes of people. The word's slipping me right now, but how do you create that kind of attachment to the behavior for companies as well, outside of individuals, which I think we have a lot more maybe emotional or intentional attachment to the decisions we make. But how do you do so for incentivizing companies?
Yeah. So I think it's about, we approach companies and I guess expect different things out of companies than is the standard in terms of how we think of the system of a corporation. Since the Industrial Revolution, businesses have been treated like non-human entities. It's, it's the company, it's for the profit or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Companies have been compartmentalized to not be directly related to the people that run it, work in it, et cetera. And so I think we need to, treat companies like human entities and human systems, because that's exactly what they are, built up of human emotions, values, ethics, personal choices, and preferences. And so you really do see that a lot of that happening nowadays where, within HR departments, a really strong values and ethics statement is put out there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that's the biggest thing, is starting to realize that the ethos of your employees will be directly related to the business decisions that get made for the company.
Yeah.
And if your employees understand why sustainability is important and necessary to mitigating climate change, then they will care about the choices they make and how those choices affect climate change.
Yeah. Shifting it in terms of, coming at it from as a founder, going and, acquiring more customers and thinking about the customer acquisition funnel, especially for sustainability. I feel like I have no experience with doing so. I don't run a company that focuses on that. And so how do you tackle, acquiring customers and I guess building the trust and building behaviors to help them kind of not only engage with your platform, but also to make those decisions and make those a habit, reporting and getting those incentives? What have been some of the challenges in kind of creating like customer retention around a new innovative space that's really kind of growing now?
Yeah, it's been honestly, like 2022 was a hard year for that. It was like kind of a roller coaster ride just in terms of what was going on in the climate space. Like, once the Inflation Reduction Act got put into place, everything kind of switched. And once the SEC released their disclosures that they might be implementing on greenhouse gas emission reporting for companies, that kind of shifted things too. But then the turn of, and these fears of a recession was coming down the line. So the first half of like these great policies got put into place, and the second half was like, no, it's a recession. Everything cut down budget, cut down workforce. And so it's, what are the first things that go when you need to cut budget? And that could be your ESG department. And so it's really kind of been a roller coaster ride, because what's really important about working within the climate space is making the business case, like why we need to think with more long-term frameworks in place. Everything's pretty short-term thinking right now, but the more sustainable choice is usually the more cost-effective choice in the long run. But we, right now we look at scales of 1 to 5 years when we should really be looking at scales of, 5 to 10 years. But that's really hard because you have to make a profit to make to have the budgets to implement an ESG department. So it's just like most businesses, I think, it's chicken or the egg game. And so it's just balancing act, with government in the seat and wearing the hat of, with the majority of the government wearing the hat of, climate change is something we need to actively, work towards managing and mitigating. That helps a ton. Whereas before with the previous government, it was not the case. And it was really, no wonder where this will actually go.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to see that there's more of a organized push towards just building better habits for not only corporations, but individuals. And I think, it should, hopefully, we'll see compounding effects of it. And I'm excited for, the more programs that are incentivizing. So describe a little bit, if you could, the technology and the user experience. If I, as an individual or I, as a corporation, were going to Sustaio and start kind of using the platform, and what incentives should I expect, if I'm working and making better, or I guess having better climate-friendly behaviors?
Yeah. So at Sustaio, we are currently working on the next generation of the platform, where ultimately you as a consumer can get rewarded for reducing your carbon and water footprint with direct monetary incentives. So that's not all I can say about that right now, but we're really excited about what's coming on the line. But just to kind of nerd out on like what you can do as an individual to reduce your footprint, there's just, there's so many different facets of life. And so at Sustaio, we really draw the boundary about what is the everyday actions of one individual takes and how can we reduce or make those actions more efficient, more climate smart. So, like household energy is a huge area of that. And just simply, and it's really simple things that some of us just don't have strong habits built around. So, and it's nothing, it's nothing we haven't heard before. It's turning off light switches, making sure your water pressure is not excessive or, overindulgent. So that just means like putting aerators on your faucet, dialing down your thermostat just a little bit. And it doesn't take, we kind of have this mantra in Sustaio where it's like little changes make a big difference. And it's just like decreasing your thermostat by 2 degrees in hot or cold times makes a massive difference, not only in your energy bill, but in the kilowatt hours that then directly have your factors related to it. So it's really the small things. It's checking your tire pressure so you get better fuel economy. It's making sure your laundry load is full if you don't have a HE, washing appliance, which most of us do nowadays. It's putting your clothes on a line dryer instead of using the dryer in the summer, because why not use the fan to dry your clothes instead of, a machine? And then, hey, that gets you outside for 5 minutes to hang your clothes, so there's just like, it's like, how do we improve the quality of life by taking more sustainable actions and being more intentional in those moments? Because there's other health benefits to doing those things.
Yeah.
And then what else? There's just so many things. There's so many ways, especially within fashion, to just buy recycled clothing, upmade clothing that then gets, back into the hands of consumers instead of going to landfills. And then ultimately with waste, it's really hard to get away from packaging waste, especially in this day and age. But yeah, I remember my friend once asked me like, I want a more sustainable trash bag. Like, what's a good sustainable trash bag? And I was like, well, what you really need to worry about in that situation is putting less trash in the bag. That's ultimately what the biggest emitter is there. But it's hard to juggle carbon. And sometimes one action that's really easy for you to do doesn't have that big of a, carbon impact in comparison to like taking one less flight a year. But like little things can add up. And if, hey, I can't take less flights, but I can totally, be more efficient by managing my household energy better, which has a really dirty fuel mix or a really dirty grid mix because my county still runs off coal or whatever it is. There's really good ways to counterbalance the places in your life that you just simply can't cut your emissions in.
Yeah. Yeah. Shifting focus in terms of like growing and scaling, the company, and especially within the industry that you're in. What are some of the challenges that you've seen, with raising funding or getting people on board to, get behind the mission, the goal of the company? And honestly, getting behind the building of a technology that I think a lot of people can benefit from, and which is kind of a different model, whereas typically the company kind of scales and grows and, has this huge exit or maybe goes through an acquisition. How has it been kind of having conversations around funding and building a technology that's, I think, a little bit more holistic than other companies that they set out?
Yeah, it's been really tough because we are a new type of product that doesn't exist and a new type of market that is very young. And we're early to market, we're very early to market with our product. So it's been a threefold, and we're a B2B2C company. So there's many different factors that face this, a very challenging business. But that's just what I got obsessed with during my master's. It's like, how do we change behavior?
Yeah.
And, how do we change behavior to be more climate smarter? You do that with incentives. Okay, how do we get people inside? So it's just been this huge puzzle piece that's been a lot of fun to put together. But the money is definitely out there in terms of the funding landscape. You just have to find the people who are really willing to take an early bet on climate mitigation software and technology. So it's been hard, simple to say. And I think a lot of people think traction happens really fast, but not for us. Traction does not happen really fast, and we're getting closer and closer every day.
Yeah.
But that's like the honest truth about it.
Yeah. As a founder, I like to ask this question. How do you kind of stay, motivated or stay kind of, I guess, energized every day to continue tackling the problem? I think, there's a fantasy around the level of energy that a founder has and that it's unlimited if you love the product or time. But honestly, we're all human and it all kind of takes a toll and we need to recharge. And I guess, how do you kind of manage the ups and downs of being a founder?
Yeah, I think the first thing was I love where I live, and I've always been really intentional about where I live.
Yeah.
Because the day-to-day is the most important part. If you don't love what you're doing, I don't know, this is an unpopular opinion, but I'm not about the weekend warrior vibe, where I don't know, it's you should love where you live. And so that's one thing. I walk outside and then I'm surrounded by the people and type of ecosystem that I love. And then, I don't know, sometimes you're just really down on your business. You're like, what am I doing here? And I think that roller coaster is normal for everyone. But I think it's what I've done that has really helped me has been you know what? I'm not really excited about this right now, but I love being, an entrepreneur. I love being my own boss.
Yeah.
Before this, I had a design firm. So I think I am somebody who will be a serial entrepreneur and continue to start my own companies. And it's give us another 6 months and see what happens. You're already here. You could spend 6 months looking for a job if you just give up and quit right now. So give it another 6 months, see what happens.
Yeah.
And then every time I've done that, once I get to that 6-month mark, I'm like, give it another 6 months. Like, look at all the things that you've made. Like, just go with 6 more months.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how my 2022 went. And I'm so glad I didn't like throw in the towel yet, because I'm so like, I've gotten to a point where we've made this huge breakthrough in the business, and I'm so excited about what's about to happen in this next year that I'm so glad I didn't give up when it was really dark.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of founders echo that same point. It's like right when it's the bleakest is when, the results that you've been hoping for or working towards will actually, kind of present themselves and illuminate. And then it becomes a new kind of challenge that's ahead of you and a new kind of exciting journey or chapter to it. What, as a founder, what are you better at now that you maybe weren't so good at before when you first kind of started your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. So like, I come from the world of design where you just kind of have to have a thick skin and not take things personal, because like the course of your business is always having your work critiqued to make it better or meet the client's needs or whatever. So I was like, I thought I had a pretty thick skin, but now like, it's not like I'm still don't get down about things, but now it's like just trying not to take things personal. Like, it's hard as a founder because like, it's literally like a culmination of who you are and what you're embodying, and you're putting it into a product. But at the end of the day, like, people, like, whether or not your business succeeds, like, measuring yourself worth on how successful your business is, it's just not like those are not interrelated. So I think that's one thing. But yeah, I kind of forgot the question, and I'm remembering.
No, the question was, what are you better at now that maybe you weren't so good at the founder early on?
Yeah. So yeah, I think just like, I like every time there's a fire, it's like, cool, how are we going to fix it? So just like getting better at rolling with the punches. Now it's like, great, this might have totally like stopped eating us. And like, nope, we'll figure it out. And he's like trying to stay as positive as possible. And it's like, the world's not ending. It just kind of feels like it this very moment. So just being able to rebound a lot quicker.
Yeah, I love that point you made about not attaching your self-worth to the success of the business. And I think that's something a lot of founders, learn with experience. And something advice I was given early on, but didn't take in the moment I got it, which I wish I did. But it's just kind of, detaching yourself from that and creating it as a project and working on this. And, the goal of it is kind of bigger than your overall, I guess I don't want to say ego, because I think it's a little bit harsh of a term, but your overall, like you said, worth. Going back to Sustaio, what are some of the biggest challenges that Sustaio faces today?
I think just getting to that 100% product market fit is our biggest challenge today. The thing with what we're doing is such a tricky product, and like I said, we're an early product and an early market. And so those are our biggest challenges right now. But like I said, the government's in our favor as of right now. And there's so many things that happened over the past year that have really just continued to, open people's eyes to the effects of climate change firsthand. So yeah I think, we just got to get our next generation of our product live, and we're on a tight timeline. And so, that's it. Just making sure we keep the midnight oil burning, pretty much is what it is.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Sustaio?
Yeah. So, the reason I started this company is because I wanted a accurate read on how is my sustainability score based off of my actions this last week. How do I know if I'm progressing if I don't have the data to back it up? So ultimately, while we're building up Sustaio, and with the Sustaio score, we're building the standard for how consumers to know how they're doing when it comes to their climate impact, and utilize that to be a better climate steward, and ultimately reap the rewards of doing that. So one day I see Sustaio being able to unlock better pricing for individuals on their home loan, on better financing for buying a house, on their insurance, because insurers bear the biggest burdens with climate change. So I'm really excited to, I often relate Sustaio, the Sustaio score to a FICO for sustainability. And that's really what we're doing. We're democratizing how you can manage your climate impact and your carbon to elevate your quality of life, much like gaining debt does and did. That really changed the tables for a lot of people. Before, there wasn't a way to use debt so that a quality of life, and debt is a tool that we use every day to make sure that we have everything we want or need in life. So that's really like the long-term vision is doing what the FICO does with debt to what we're doing with climate management and rewarding to ultimately unlock those better deals for people in the long run with their financing.
Amazing. And I always like to ask this next question, not only for our audience, but also for selfish research purposes. But whether it's early on or now, outside of the Wal-Mart Effect, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Natural Capitalism, I think, is an amazing book that is super powerful. And they just released a new edition a couple of years ago. And it really talks about what we're seeing a lot of in the markets today are X as a service, dishwasher as a service, phone as a service, food as a service, instead of keeping ownership over things. Like, do we really need to own the car we drive every day or the house in a minute? So it really changed my type of thinking on ownership versus service. So that's a really good one. I love Cradle to Cradle too. That's our regenerative model that is kind of turning things on its head right now. And then, I think those two. I could list books all day, but I think those two are really strong to start with.
I love that. And I sometimes ask the question, and I'd love to ask you this: is there anything I didn't ask you or that you would have liked to answer?
I guess no, I don't think so. But I'm curious, since you've talked to so many of us, what's the biggest repeating theme you see with talking to founders these days?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the biggest themes are a lot of what you talked about in terms of going through the motions and the challenges and kind of a perspective and mindset, and a lot of that is repeating, and also the personality types, or I guess the individual qualities that founders have are kind of repeating: determination, grit. Somebody coined naivete to me the other day.
For sure.
Yeah. And then also in terms of just building foundation and metrics, how important it is as founders to, and honestly, what my co-founder told me when we were building our company is, how important the foundation is, because founders do everything that nobody else wants to do when building a company. And it's a lot of things people don't want to do either, but it's choosing the right, tools to work with, choosing the right partners, the right network, and then making mistakes quickly, and then having, the mentality to work through them and find a solution for them. So it's a lot of philosophy, a lot of, motivation, kind of motivational piece of information, but also strategically, in terms of go-to-market strategies, testing, A/B testing everything, keeping track, keeping a tight timeline. Yeah. Not to give it away all in this episode, because everybody has to listen to the other ones, but that's kind of the common themes. It's very much mentality, mindset. And then it's cool to see that a lot of businesses function the same, whether the product or the service is different. The mechanics of business are fairly structured, and they change with it's I think about it like a microscope. There's not a lot of course adjustment you do up to a certain point. Once you need to see the detail of whatever you're looking at, it's a lot of fine adjustment and seeing the different, slight layers of things. So that's kind of how I view it now. Yeah.
I've got a good one then. Ask me how many times I've pivoted.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. Oh, that's such a good one. How many times have you pivoted?
Sure. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in the last 2.5 years.
That's not bad. It's funny because I guess popular opinion, or I guess popular belief, one founder coined this term to me. I think his name was Chris Klein from Boomtown, was it? He said, product market fit is a moment in time. And so companies need to change and need to do, whether it's a big pivot or micro pivot, because that will be what the market or their customers dictating them to do. A lot of people get into the fallacy that a pivot is like an internal decision, whereas it's a decision based on the moment in time. And I thought that took a huge weight off my shoulder. I was like, okay, cool. I can change my mind if I need to. Yeah.
And it's at first I was a little embarrassed to pivot, and I'm like, no, it's evolution, it's growth.
Yeah. Founders get it. Yeah. Founders get the pivot and the moment in time. Well, Olivia, I know we're close to the end of the show, and it's such a fun time chatting with you, and especially learning about, new emerging markets like climate technology and kind of your challenges that you're facing, but also sounds like some really good news that I think we'll all be excited about to hear in the near future. So I always like to give my guests a chance to give us your plugs at the end of the show. Where are your LinkedIn? What's your website? Where are your Twitters? Where can we find you? And also be a fan of the new launch that will be coming out, and maybe even get involved ourselves and download and start working with the incentive that you'll be offering.
Yeah, you can go to Sustaio.com and ultimately go on to our newsletter and get signed up there if you want to stay tuned for the new release coming down the line. And then we do have generation 1 of the software live today. So it's actually open and free to everyone right now. And that's at my.sustaio.com, where you can go get your Sustaio score, generation 1, and use the platforms to get familiar with some of the climate actions you can take in your everyday life. Otherwise, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And we'll have good news for you guys in the middle of next year.
Amazing. Well, Olivia, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you so much again for joining the show. It was such a pleasure to chat with you.
Cool. Thank you so much.